system webinar. Um, at this time, I'll let my colleague introduce herself and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Donald. I'm also a program assistant at RSF.
Okay, so before we get into the thick of things, I would first like to address some housekeeping notes. So first, this meeting is being recorded and will be available on our website within the days. If you do have questions regarding um, the recording, feel free to email us at programs@rsh.org. For the duration of the webinar, please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We will answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Um, Also, keep in mind when you're asking your questions to to refrain from asking any project-specific questions, as this is meant to be more of a general um, webinar. And if you do have any specific questions regarding your project, you're more than welcome to email us at programs@rsh.org. Next, we have our agenda. First, we're going to kind of go over a little overview about who we are at the Russell Sage Foundation. Then we'll go into an overall funding priorities and followed by a overview of our CRCJ application process. And finally, we will wrap up with Q&As. So, who are we at the Russell Sage Foundation? Um, the Russell Sage Foundation is the oldest philanthropy in the United States. It was founded by Margaret Olivia Sage, who was the widow of Mr. Sage. I forget his first name. Um, it was founded in 1907 with institutional support um, from the Sage family. And at that time, between 1907 to 1944, it was really focused more on community development projects that supported city planning, labor reform, housing projects, etc. After 1945, the foundation shifted towards supporting research priorities relating to um, social issues in the United States and strengthening the methods, data, and theoretical um, core of social sciences. Our main disciplines, though not limited, include sociology, economics, political science, and psychology. But overall, the Russell Sage Foundation is dedicated towards improving the social and living conditions of those in the United States.
So, RSF supports work in these areas through four main funding priorities. The first is behavioral science and decision making in context. This evolved out of our previous program in this area on behavioral economics. And we're encouraging economists and non-economists alike to study economic, social, political, and psychological decision-making processes, attitudes, behaviors, institutional practices that are relevant to our other three funding priorities, as well as some of our special initiatives. Our Future of Work program was one of our oldest programs, started in 1994. We're interested in anything that impacts the labor market. So that includes, but isn't limited to, AI, effects of the minimum wage raises, unionization, worker power, and so on. Our social, political, and economic inequality program examines factors that contribute to social, political, and economic inequalities in the US, and the extent to which those inequalities affect social, political, psychological, and economic outcomes, such as educational and labor market access and opportunities, social and economic mobility within and across generations, and civic participation and representation. Um, Lastly, our race, ethnicity, and immigration program examines the roles of race, ethnicity, nativity, and legal status and their interactions with each other and other social categories in the social, economic, and political outcomes for immigrants, US-born racial and ethnic minorities, and native-born whites. We also have a couple big buckets that we don't usually fund. The first is studies that are focused primarily on health outcomes. This is because there's lots of other foundations out there doing that kind of work. We also don't fund work on educational processes, teacher outcomes, or curricular development. We don't fund work on subjects outside of the United States. And we don't typically fund operational support, individual small scale program evaluations, animal studies, documentaries, things like that. In addition to our core program areas, we have two special initiatives. The first is the Immigration and Immigrant Integration Initiative, which is co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which supports work on the effects of race, citizenship, legal status, and politics, political culture, and public policy on outcomes for immigrants and for the native-born of different racial and ethnic groups and generations. The second initiative, with the really long title, which is co-funded with the Hewlett Foundation, Spencer Foundation, and the W.T. Grant Foundation, is looking at the repercussions and outcomes following the 2023 Supreme Court decision to end race-conscious college admission policies. So we're looking to understand the downstream effects of the decision relating to labor outcomes, and hiring practices following that Supreme Court decision. We have a bunch of different funding mechanisms through which we support work on these priorities. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here since we're going to focus on the causal research on the criminal justice system program. But we have two sets of core research grants, our trustee grants and our presidential grants. The main difference here is in the budget. Trustee grants are capped at $200,000, where presidential grants are capped at $75,000. And the eligibility for both of these is to have a terminal degree or a PhD in your field. These are up to 2-year grants with a two-step application process. First, you'll submit an LOI, followed by a full proposal. And the upcoming deadlines for these are March 11th, at which we'll be accepting applications under the SPEI and Future of Work FOW programs, and July 15th, at which we'll be accepting applications under the behavioral science, race, ethnicity, and immigrant integration programs. Our early career grants are called the Sheldon Danziger Pipeline Grants Competition, the Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System program, and the Dissertation Research Grants program. These are all 1-year grant, one-step application processes, where you submit everything that we need to evaluate your application and make a funding decision at the time of your first submission. There are various different caps here. The Sheldon Danziger pipeline grants are capped at $50,000 for individuals, $65,000 for teams, and it's open to all non-tenure, pre-tenure professors, faculty, regardless of institution. And it's co-funded from by the Gates Foundation, the Policy Academies, and JPAL. The deadline for the pipeline grants is every fall, so the next deadline is going to be October 21st of this year. We'll go into a lot more detail about the CRCJ program in the rest of the webinar, but here's a bit of an overview. Up to $100,000 and open to tenure track assistant professors at U.S. institutions. It's a program co-funded by Arnold Ventures, and the next deadline is, of course, April 1st at 2 p.m. Lastly, in case you're curious, we have a dissertation research grants program, which are 1-year grants up to $15,000 for ABD PhD students at U.S. institutions. It's also supported by the W.E. Upjohn Institute and WCEG, and the deadline for that is each winter, every February. So we've just received our most recent slate of applications there. In addition to our funding mechanisms, we have 2 in-residence fellowships that we offer, the Visiting Scholars and Visiting Researchers program. The difference here is in the length of the term and in the financial support. So the Visiting Scholars program is a 10-month in-residence fellowship with financial support from RSF, and the deadline for the 2027-2028 academic year is this June. The visiting researcher fellowship is a shorter term fellowship that does not come with financial support. And the deadline for the this coming academic year, so 2026, 2027, is this May. For these, the requirements are that you have a PhD or a career in peer-reviewed scholarly research. And it's a one-step application where you submit a proposal, an application, and then it's evaluated by our team.
Okay. So the causal research on the criminal justice system application deadline again is April 1st, 2026 at 2 p.m. Um, the for this program, the CRCJ program, it is a 1-year grant of up to $100,000 with 15% indirect costs for tenure track assistant professors at U.S. institutions um, that are conducting causal research on the criminal justice system. Some topics of interest for for RSF include sentencing policy and prison outcomes, the effects of social policy and community safety and criminal justice involvement, crime victimization, decision-making, bias and disparities, policing, court, and criminal processing. Keep in mind, these topics areas are generally, we are generally interested, are not exhaustive. Um, They are related to RFCF's core priority areas, including race, ethnicity, and immigration, social, political, and economic inequality, and behavioral science and decision-making in context. We will consider proposals on the effects of both the criminal justice system for both adults and juveniles. Um, some categories that are potentially that you may receive funding for include PI or co-PI salary support of up to $15,000 or one course buyout. Please keep in mind that course buyouts are not limited to $15,000, but to the cost of one course buyout. If a course buyout is less than $15,000, the remainder can be taken as summer salary. You may also use $3,000 for US-based conference travel, research assistance, data acquisition, and data collection. Also, keep in mind that formal budgets are not needed at the time of at the time of the application submission. We will go over further details about required documents later in the presentation. So what do we mean by causal research methods? Um, so the Russell Sage Foundation is generally uh, interested in the following causal research methods. Research design that can be reliably isolate the treatment effects of policy, practice, or intervention. Pilot RCTs, difference and difference, um, regression discontinuity, and instrument variables. Um, Proposals must include causal research designs that can reliably isolate the treatment effects of a policy, practice, or intervention. If you do have any further questions about if your causal design is suitable for our program, please feel free to email us at programs@rsh.org. Um, if there are qualitative components towards your research methods, that is allowable as long as the causal design is central to the project. However, there may be some projects that are diverted to Russell Sage's core research application cycle. If that is the case, we will contact you and notify you of those switches. That just means that you will be added to our pool for the core research grants um, consideration. The next important aspect of this program is that it includes mentorship and a capstone conference, or better yet, a capstone workshopping conference. So first, we're going to discuss the mentorship. Mentors are expected to meet with their mentees at least once a month at the minimum. And this could be through Zoom calls, phone calls, emails, however you and your mentor feel comfortable communicating, as long as there is consistent, at least monthly communication. Um, Mentors are meant to not only guide you and support you through the project that you are developing, but they're also there to help you with career questions and also to guide you um, through your blossoming careers. The selection process for mentors is a collaborative process. Applicants will submit their potential or their list of potential mentors that they feel are would be the best support for their project. And advisory committee members will also make suggestions based on their experience and network. Um, you don't have to be shy about who you ask to be your mentor. Um, the Russell Sage Foundation will do their utmost to select a senior scholar that is best suited towards your project. And we generally have a pretty good track record of getting the first choice or the first choices for mentors. Um, and again, this is a collaborative process, so um, we will work with you to get the best mentor in for you. The next aspect is the capstone workshop conference. So this is a 1 year grant. At the end of the grant period, you will present your workshop, I mean your project at a workshopping conference. We expect that a lot of these projects will be in progress. So do not feel weird or uncertain if your project is unfinished. That is the expectation. And we actually prefer it that way because then you can get feedback on your ongoing work um, from other senior scholars. This is also a time for networking and socializing. The conference will occur in the winter following the first year. So that would be the winter of 28 for those that are funded or funded for this cycle.
Transitioning to talk a little bit about the application itself and the application process. Um, what actually goes into the proposal that you submit? The first piece, which is not written on this slide, is that the application must be submitted via Flux. That's our grants management platform. We'll put a link to it on the last slide, so you can go in and create an account and look at the application form itself. The biggest part of your application, though, is this 10-page proposal. There's no particular format or order required for these elements, other than that it's 12 pages, 12-point font, single spaced. Um, Typical components to be included are your introduction, problem statement, why is this important, your research question, hypotheses, a literature review, and then you want to spend most of the proposal talking about your research design and analysis. We typically advise that um, uh, half to three-quarters of the proposal should be centered on your research design and on your analyses. So tell us about your data source, tell us about your data collection, tell us in as much detail as possible about your methodology, and then walk us through your analytic plan. How are you going to answer the question or the hypotheses that you've proposed earlier in the application or earlier in the proposal? Um, the last piece of this that is helpful are any preliminary analyses that you can include. If you have pilot data, if you can demonstrate the feasibility of the project as proposed, um, you can include that as tables or charts in a one-page appendix. Um, Last, some things that we just don't want you to waste too much space on because we want to see in as much detail as possible the information about your project. We don't need too much detail on the budget at this point because you're not submitting a formal budget. We just need an overall dollar amount and a sentence or two about what you'll spend it on. Something like, I'm requesting $100,000 for salary support, data purchase, and an RA is sufficient. We also don't need too much on investigator qualifications. You submit your CV when you submit the application, and that's all that we need to be able to evaluate your qualifications to complete this project. And then lastly, we don't need a broader impact section or some of the things that you might see in a proposal to a place like NSF. Um, Sometimes we get those applications, and it's pretty obvious that it's an application that's not tailored to RSF. So I would advise you to really spend some time to make this the best application you can for the Russell Sage Foundation. Once you submit your application, it'll go undergo internal staff review. At this point, we're looking for three things. We're looking for if it's a fit for RSF's funding priorities, if there's sufficient detail, and if the project's in the right stage for funding. So, common reasons for rejection at the internal review phase is that it's not a funding priority. For example, it's not focused on the United States. It's not a social science project, or the outcomes aren't of interest to the foundation. So it's too focused on health outcomes, for example. Another common reason at this stage is that there's just not enough detail to evaluate the methodology and the analytic plan. Um, for example, if the literature review or there's too much is taking up too much space and we don't get enough detail on the design. Um, Lastly, if the project is nearly complete and you're just requesting funds for write-up time, or alternatively, the project is totally preliminary and for example, you don't really know exactly what you're going to do yet. You don't know what data source you're trying to use, or you don't know what data you want to collect. Those would be examples of being at the wrong stage. For our early career grants, we generally don't worry too much about projects being preliminary. We know that applying to this might be the first time that you're receiving significant external funding in order to be able to do, for example, a pilot or something like that. And causal designs can get pretty expensive when you think about RCTs. So don't if you're concerned that your project is too preliminary, I would apply anyway. Shoot us an email in advance of the deadline. Um, Once we have internally reviewed and screened our applications go out to external review, where we request comments from peers with topical or methodological expertise in the subject area. So we're asking, are the research questions important? Are they clearly stated? Are they appropriately supported in terms of the prior theory and empirical work? Is the design and are the methods appropriate to address these questions? For example, is there sufficient power? We ask for a comment on the qualifications of the investigator and if the work can actually be carried out. We ask about contribution of the project to the field and note that we're asking about contribution not just to your specific field or subfield, but across disciplines. So RSF is a multidisciplinary funder. There's a very good chance that even if you're an economist, your proposal is going to be reviewed by a sociologist. And then we ask for additional comments and recommendations. If the application receives sufficient support in this phase, you'll be asked to respond to reviews, and then the whole packet of materials will be sent to our advisory committee for a funding decision in July of 2026. Once that decision is made and you've been notified of an approval, we'll have an onboarding. You'll learn a little bit more about this sort of due diligence process. Budget and any additional materials will be due in August for a grant start date on or after October 1st of this fall. And then, as Deandra mentioned, the capstone conference or workshop will be in winter of 2028, looking at probably January 2028. So as we've hinted, this is a one-stage application process. So at submission, all we need from you is the Flux application form, a 10-page single-spaced proposal, the CV of the PI or co-PIs. Post-review, we'll ask for a reviewer response memo, Um, and then post-approval, we'll ask for a budget narrative, and any of the other due diligence materials. So that's things like IRB approval, confirmation of data access, etc. Um, the big thing here is just that we don't require a budget at the time of submission. So, and we do that in order to kind of lighten the load of the application. So you're not having to jump through a bunch of hoops with your Office of Sponsored Projects before actually getting the grant made. Lastly, before we move on to the Q&A, uh, RSF has a couple of other things that might be of interest. The first is our journal, the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of the Social Sciences, which you can take a look at rsfjournal.org. We also have a dataset repository, which links to the datasets that were produced through RSF funding. That's at russellsage.org/datasets. Um, and you can check out the application, the deadlines for grant types on our website, um, which is russellsage.org. Okay, I think we can open the floor to
Mhm.
Q&A.
So we have a few questions in the queue already. So first I'll start with our first question, which is, do you review project abstracts for suitability for this call? I'm assuming that you mean that you're going to send us an abstract through via email, and the question is yes. Please limit that to a one-page abstract. And either myself, my colleague Maya, or our supervisor, Stephen Glauser, will review that and give you feedback. Um, the next question I see, do we submit our list of potential mentors with the application, or does that happen later? There is a question in the application that specifically asks, um, like, who would you potentially like as a mentor? So at the time of submission, that is a question that you'll be asked and that you're expected to fill out. You could ask later on in the process for more. If you are selected for funding, we will follow up and ask you again, like, hey, is this the appropriate list? Do you want to add more people? Are there other people to consider as a mentor? And again, don't be shy when you're asking for mentors. For our pipeline program, there was one grantee who noted how they had asked for a mentor that they had cited quite often, and they had figured that this person's way too busy, they would not be able to be my mentor. That person ended up agreeing to be the mentor, and they've had a very great relationship, and they've remained colleagues after this. So again, don't be shy. We will work with you and do our best to get you the appropriate mentor. The next question I see, can an assistant professor, PI, apply alongside a full professor? Yes, they can. So the full professor can apply as a co-PI, but they will not receive funding. Because this is meant for, the funding is meant for assistant tenure track professors. Um, okay. The next question that we have here, is there a maximum number of grants expected to be awarded under this call? Um, Last year we funded 5 projects. To my knowledge, I am not entirely sure. Maya, do you
I
have
think it's
enough?
probably around the same,
Probably,
like five or
yeah.
six. Um,
It is
so
it is a tough cycle.
yeah,
It's
it can
not,
be,
yeah,
yeah, we find, so our funding rate, we didn't receive a ton of projects last round.
that is true.
Um, so our funding rate was, I think, higher than our funding rate for our other programs is hovers in like the 8 to 9% range of from like all applications to number of applications funded. This is only our second year of running this program, so we don't have a ton of data to be able to say a lot about the competitiveness of this cycle, but we'll look to fund probably 5 or 6 this year.
So the next question I see here if RSF does not fund international research, does it fund projects that address the effects of U.S. military operations abroad on America's behavior or political opinion? I see there's a second part of this question, so I'll read the first one and I'll separate or yeah. Separately, does RSF fund research on public opinion or do you prioritize behavioral outcomes only? Okay, so the first part of this question, yes, the Russell Sage Foundation, because of our endowment, we are limited to only supporting projects that focus on the United States. Our endowment limits us in that capacity. However, that does not mean that we are like there are some gray areas in a sense. So if you're looking at a comparative question, between the United States, like maybe you're comparing, and I'm hypothetical, you're comparing the public opinion on American military operations between America, like American citizens and French citizens, right? That would be a comparative topic that we might be interested in. Another project or we um we would fund data collection outside of the United States, but as long as the project is central to a US issue or policy. For example, we had a PI a few years ago who did data collection on US deportees to, I believe, Mexico or Guatemala. I don't recall at this time. Um, So we funded the travel for that PI to go to Mexico or Guatemala to collect data. This was kind of that gray area because these were US deportees in another country. So in that way, we were able to fund that project. But if it's solely about, you know, public opinion in France or whatever, then that would not go through. But it would have to have some basis in US policy. But if you would like to send us an abstract of your project, again, one of us will review it at the email listed on the screen. The second part of your question, does RSF fund research on public opinion or do you prioritize behavioral outcomes only? We have funded projects that do public opinion as well. So again, if you do have specific questions about your project, I would feel free to email us and we will give you the best feedback we can. Um,
Couple questions about mentors. The mentors do not need to be affiliated with RSF, so they can be anyone. And you do not need to contact the mentors before you submit. That's RSF facilitates the recruitment of the mentors. You don't have to do anything. We know that I don't know, it can be kind of awkward. We don't want to put you in that position. So we'll facilitate um, recruiting a mentor. And that all of that is something you can think about mostly post-approval.
so I see here a question, are teaching or research track faculty not eligible? If that's the case, what about as co-investigators on a submission? So again, the eligibility for this project or for this program is tenured track assistant professors. If you are not tenured track, unfortunately, you would not be eligible. But I do believe you could be a co-PI, but unfortunately, you would not receive funding. So yeah. Do you want to take the next question, Maya?
Yes. So I'm gonna do my best from what I can understand about this from the question. When we say we don't support research on health outcomes, it can't be one of the primary outcomes. If there are other outcomes that you're looking at in the proposal, that's fine. But what we're trying to avoid here is um, uh, we don't fund projects where health outcomes are um, one of the core pieces of the application or the core piece of the application. So this project that you describe here about addressing substance or mental health disorders and an intervention on that, that probably wouldn't be a great fit for the Russell Sage Foundation. Um, you've shared something about criminal justice outcomes as well, but it's not there. I don't know a ton about uh what that project is. So I think I would advise you to send us an email at programs@rsage.org with an abstract or a little overview of your application, and we can give you something that's more in depth. Um, I don't know off the top of my head how many applications we had from that CRCJ cycle. I think it was, less than 100. Um, maybe less than 50, but I would have to look into that. If you send in an abstract, I would do that sooner rather than later because our inbox can get a little bit busy ahead of a deadline. But we'll try to get back to you within a week.
I saw a question, it's a little down the line, but it's relating to mentors again. I felt like I should just respond to this live. The question is it mandatory to have a mentor? If a mentor is not listed, would we be automatically assigned one? Um, so if you do not list a mentor, um, you would be assigned one based on the advisor committee's uh suggestions, basically. Um, so the mentorship component of this program is is pretty core, because we understand that you are early in your careers and we want to provide senior scholar support to you, not only for the development of this project, but also as a career, someone to guide you in your career. Um, so if you don't have any suggestions, the advisory committee will make those on your behalf. So it just benefits you to put, and it gives you kind of agency to, give your opinion and say, I think these folks would be the best for my project and what I would like to do.
Yeah, and dream big there. Like put the names of the people that you're citing because RSF can kind of throw our weight around and we get people to mentor through that, all the time. Also, we have the support of Arnold Ventures as well.
Hmm.
So it's not, dream big here and don't limit yourself in this regard.
Hmm. Also, I see a question here about other required documents for the application deadline, which is April 1st at 2 p.m. Um, so at the time of submission, we only require two documents. That is the 10-page proposal narrative and your 5-page CV. In your application, so you have to create a Flux account and submit the application through Flux. In the Flux application form, they're going to ask you who are your mentors, among other questions, right? Who are your suggested mentors? And that's also a space where you can add an abstract. The abstract is also a required field, so you can't submit the application if you don't fill out that field, right? So those are the only things that we need at the time of submission. Budgets, budget justifications, and other documents, that comes later in the process. In fact, I don't know, Maya, if you can go back to the document slide. Yes.
Here.
So this basically shows you the step-by-step what you need, right? So at the time of submission, again, that's just the proposal and the CV. After it is externally reviewed, we will ask you to have a response memo to your external reviewers. After that, after the deadline that you submit your response memo, it will be reviewed by the advisory committee, and they will make decisions about um, who should be selected for funding. And then it says it's post approval, so that means that you're likely going to be funded. So at that time, that is when you submit your budget narrative, and other due diligence materials. So If you'd like, please take a screenshot of this particular page because this will help you to understand what you need. And the reason why we do this is because we understand that the Office of Sponsored Projects, they could ask for a lot of things very early on that are a little unnecessary for us. So this is to lighten the load on our applicants and to just have them focus on developing the strongest type of proposal that they can.
Um, to answer Megan's question about RCT, we know RCTs are super expensive. 100K is not necessarily going to get you very much there. So it would be good to look at if you're doing an RCT, you can look at this program as giving you funding for a pilot RCT or something of that nature. Um, if you and then that could be parlayed into requesting funds from another institution that maybe makes larger size grants than RSF does with your pilot data that you got from the CRCJ program. That could potentially be uh, one of through our core research grants as well. If the budget cap there of 200,000 aligns with your project, there's not necessarily an expectation of the experiment to also be funded through another stream at RSF or at another from another institution. Um, but we do recognize that 100K is not necessarily going to be enough for a large scale RCT. So you can consider it an opportunity to gather pilot data.
Mhm. There's a question in here that is asking me to repeat the what I said about the abstract. So again, in the application form, there is a section where you can add an abstract, which is very, very brief. Um, if you want feedback on your project, and you want us to say, hey, is this a good fit for the Russell Sage Foundation or for the CRCJ program, you can send us a one-page abstract and we will review it. But on the application process or on the application form itself, there are a bunch of questions. Among those questions, you will be asked to add an abstract, which should be like a paragraph that gives you an over or gives us an overview of the project. That's what I mean by abstract. So if I'm incorrect, please feel you can email us at programs. But that's basically it. It's a required field on our application form in Flux. Um, so I see another question here. If an assistant professor gets promoted to associate in the fall of 26, that co-PI could not receive the fund. So if you are promoted, as long as you are still an assistant professor prior to the grant start date, so our grant start date would be October 1st. So if you get promoted before that, then that might make you ineligible.
At this point, I would say apply, and
Yeah,
we'll deal with that down the road. Um,
I agree.
we
Yes.
tenure cases, you just never know. Um,
And it could also take longer.
yeah.
So just
So
apply with us and we
yeah,
will work with you.
yeah. Um, well, I think that's everything that I'm seeing here. I'm gonna put up again our website, russellsage.org. If we didn't get to your question, um, yes, a co-PI can be an associate professor, but they cannot receive funding. Um, email us an abstract, one page, or something short for checking in about programmatic fit at programs@rsage.org. Applications can be submitted at via Flux, rsf.flux.eo. Here's a little QR code for you. And then you can sign up for our email newsletter at russellsage.org/news. And there's a QR code for that as well. Um,
There's one more question that just came through. Is there a page where the successful applications from last year are posted? Um, we do not have so we do have successful or sample proposals available on the website. Um, however, those are for our core research grant areas. We are in the process of selecting from our other program areas successful projects. Um, at this time, I think reviewing some of those might give you some guidance.
Yeah, I would look at you can look at our other past applications for other programs, like the core research grants, as Deandra said. I don't think we're going to have we're not going to be able to post applications from last year from the CRCJ program just because that work is ongoing. Um, as it, and
You could,
Yeah,
though, look at, we do list who has been funded um, on our website. At least I think we do.
yeah, it
Um,
should be in some blog post somewhere.
right. So what I would suggest is just looking at our website um, for those updates.
Okay, I think we'll sign off. Thank you all for being here. Best
Oh,
of
and
luck.
I'm sorry, just one more thing.
Hmm.
This webinar will be available on our website within at least 2 days. So if you want to rewatch this, feel free to do that or to share it with other people. As always, we will be able to respond to your questions via email.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.